Welcome to the Pragmatic Product Chat series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I am Rebecca Calageris. I am the host of Pragmatic's weekly podcast series of the same name, and I'm facilitator for today's panel discussion, From AI Experiments to Enterprise Impact. Before we dive in, three really quick housekeeping items. First, please feel free to use the chat throughout our session. It is a great way to connect with me, our panelists, your fellow attendees. In fact, why don't you use it now? You can drop a quick note in the chat telling us where you're located and one word that describes your organization's current relationship with AI. Are you guys curious, overwhelmed, infatuated, experimenting, or something else entirely? Just drop that in. Look at y'all, these in the chat, like pros. All right. Now, if instead of a comment, you've got a specific question, and we do love questions, please drop them in the Q&A section, which you will also find on the bottom bar of your Zoom window. Lastly, this session is being recorded, and we will send you a copy after the call, so you can revisit key insights, share with your teams, your friends and family. You will also receive exclusive access to Pragmatic's AI Decision Guide that we're going to be discussing today. All right, that's all of the housekeeping items. Now let's move on to why we're all here, right? As AI adoption accelerates, we see a really fascinating pattern, right? Lots of AI experiments and success stories, but many organizations are really struggling to how to translate those pockets of success into a cohesive enterprise-wide strategy that really drives value. So today we're going to hear from three Pragmatic Institute instructors who have worked with and taught hundreds of companies driving AI transformations, from AI native startups to legacy enterprises. They've been in the trenches. They've built AI products. They've seen what works and what doesn't. And they're going to share insights and answer questions today. So let me introduce our expert panel. Just like give a little wave when I say your names, guys. We have Paul Young, Amy Graham, and Dan Corbin. So again, each of these instructors got decades of experience in product management as leaders themselves, as well as many, many years working with and coaching and teaching product teams in their roles here at Pragmatic. Welcome, Paul, Amy, and Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's start a little bit more stage setting. We can turn off the slides. We don't need those. And talk about what does pockets of AI success actually look like in the organizations you work with? Where have you really seen some good AI wins?
Well, we've started to see it in a lot of different places. And I think we probably would divide today's conversation into sort of two parts. One is using AI in your work to improve your workflow as a product professional, product management marketer. And the other is building AI into your product. Related, but not the same. And so also maybe at different levels of maturity. We're kind of going rapidly through the experimentation stage and into kind of mainstream for both. But I would say that product people using AI in their workflows is probably a bit ahead of AI in the product for a lot of reasons, investment and timeframes probably not being the least. But Dan this week just led a session that Pragmatic is about to roll out around AI in your product management workflow. Which is really interesting. All the tools that product teams are now taking advantage of is probably one of the biggest areas I turn to for quick wins in the product space for AI now.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, Rebecca, I think it makes sense if you think about it, because it's a little scary and risky, and building it into your product workflow or figuring out how we can use it as product professionals feels a little bit safer. So people have been experimenting quite a bit with how they can leverage AI as a product professional, which also allows them to become more educated and knowledgeable about AI in general, which I would assume will better enable us to then put it into our products themselves. So.
Yeah, and if any of the people on the call today have taken our AI for product professionals, you've probably been involved in those discussions where people have shared like, oh, I actually started using it in this area, which gets other people like, oh, and I used it here. And I've seen that dynamic where product people are kind of sharing those wins of where they're starting to use it in these different areas.
Yeah.
And which is great. But what you're really hoping to start to see is like, all right, where can we make sure that we're using it every single day at every single stage of the product development life cycle? Because it's great to see these pockets of wins, but how do we really grasp that full potential of AI that it can deliver for product managers?
That's one of those the areas that we're grappling with it across the industry is, you know, one product manager or marketer says, yeah, and I used Perplexity and did this amazing thing. And the other one says, well, look what I use Claude for. And it's all like little bits and pieces here and there.
Yep.
But it's like, we're now starting to see VPs of product, CPOs taking a step back and saying, okay, that's all really cool. I can see the utility. But if I've got 50 different product managers on my team or product marketers, and they're all using it in a different way,
Yes.
they're getting different outputs and outcomes. Like we need something a bit more of a standard to think about how we use AI in a consistent way so that we get some better outputs and we raise the level of the entire team and it's not so mixed. That's going to be one of those things that it's just part of the maturity of going through any new technology.
Yep.
Yeah. No, and it's super interesting, as you guys said, like we are learning it by using it in our role. Gives us a much better understanding too of how we can expand that across our teams, but also then how can we leverage it further in the products. There is no better way to understand where it's good and where it's not than, working with it, right? As we see people, right? So we see lots of pockets of success, particularly on using it for the role. We see people sharing ideas as they go and start to try to kind of scale this across the organization or within their products. Where are some of the common pitfalls that we've seen?
I can kind of jump in on that because I think this is where leaders are, to Paul's point, they're struggling a little bit. And they'll look to one area like, oh, this team is really good. And maybe if I can just replicate that, what that team is doing across everything else, that's the way to do it. But that's really not, I think, the approach that we would recommend. You need to step back and understand, all right, what are the workflows where it makes sense for AI to really help the product managers? We need to come at this with using a product mindset. What is the problems that AI can help our product managers solve better? Where can it help them do their job better, be more efficient, be more effective, improve their communications, help them think more strategically? So you can't just say, oh, that team's using AI, let's replicate that everywhere else. Let's step back, assess, and take it from an AI operations standpoint. And this is where if you have a product operations team, I would say task them with surveying the teams, understanding the pain points, understanding the workflows where AI can really take out a lot of that manual work, the time-consuming work, to get that off of the plate of the product managers so that they can spend more time on the Hito visits and all of that more high-value work. So this is how you implement it in not just pockets of success, but in a real strategic manner to see the broad impact, the cascading impact of that companies are hoping for. But too often what I see is executives saying like, hey, you're doing a great job, go teach everyone else how to do it. And that's the wrong approach.
Well, and Rebecca, to your question specifically, like pitfalls, I think we want to avoid, let's go back to some basics, duplication of efforts. We want to avoid extra cost or expenses. We want to make sure that we're being responsible with AI and, from an ethics or responsibility perspective. So I think from an operational or like scaling it across the org, we got to look at all those things so that we're working smarter, not harder. And, we don't have everybody going off in their own different directions, potentially costing the business in various ways.
I'm going to take it in maybe a little bit different direction. I don't want to, people are going to accuse me of being a pessimist on AI, and I'm not. I'm actually an optimist. But to throw a little bit of cold water, I don't think the pitfall of AI is in the technology or the implementation. I think it's in our own brain. And I think it's in buying into the hype. There is just I don't know how to measure hype, but if there was like a measurement scale for hype, we'd be like off the scale for AI right now. It's incredible the amount of promises being made. And I can't tell you, every week I work with executives who either say themselves or say that their boss comes to them and basically says, AI is the answer. Now, what's the question?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like, it's just almost the default. And so the name implies artificial intelligence, that it's intelligent, but AI is not intelligent in any human sense of the word. It's a probability engine for what the next word is going to come up. And as we get into agents and some of the autonomy that AI is going to develop going forward, there's some dangers we're going to discuss here today. But I think the first thing we have to do as we start to adopt AI across the organization, and this is a call to action for everybody who's on here today, is to step back and just give ourselves a reality check to say, yes, this is a really cool new technology. No, it's not the answer to everything.
Yep. And I wish more executives had that message, because they're seeing, these dollar signs and efficiencies. And again, they really think, oh, AI is the answer to everything.
Yeah.
But they don't know, like, it can do some really, really handy things, but it is not good at other things. And as Jim said in the chat, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't know how to use these tools effectively, things are going to go really wrong. So there's so much that goes into it, and it is not a simple answer. And this is why I love that Paul brings up, beware of the AI hype. One of my favorite books is AI Snake Oil. And because people who are, in the business of selling AI will tell you all of this amazing things that it'll do for you, and without, because it, pads their wallet.
Yeah.
That is such a good segue, right? So we talked a lot about like the areas when we think about using AI further. And there's a really interesting question that we could talk about too in the Q&A about standardization. We're talking about like going from pockets to like a strategy. And their question was really like, can we standardize right now, or is it just evolving so quickly that we need to be able to continue to experiment and look at other either discrete workflows or other ways, which I thought was a really great sort of question and point that Adam made.
And it's related to Sean's question right below it. Doesn't experimentation require duplication? The answer is to that one is yes. But like when I think about standardizing for AI, first of all, take AI out of the equation for a second. Any new tool, we could be talking about a tool like Pendo or any sort of product analytics tool. So you've got Pendo, you've got Gainsight, you've got Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics. The first thing we're probably going to do is we're going to run some experiments with each of them. We're going to evaluate the results. We're going to see which one fits our needs best. And then once we choose the one that fits our needs best across the organization, we'll go implement it everywhere. Like I don't see any difference with AI in this regard, especially for workflows. You're gonna mess around with Claude, Perplexity, and like all this stuff, and you're gonna say, all right, that's the one. Let's go come up with a standard to roll that out for a bunch of teams now. Right?
Okay. Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. And I also think that there's interesting places here too where we see even across teams. So if you have a team and you do a tool for their role, the effect of that tool on the individual members will vary a great deal by the starting point of where that team member was. There was a really big study of customer service agents, like 5,200, and the impact that a new AI tool had on them, when they looked at it in aggregate was like 14%. You're like, holy crud, that's amazing. When they looked at individuals for low skill workers, it was 34%. For newcomers, it's 46. For the top members of their team, it was 0.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the other thing when we're thinking about efficiencies and gains, that it's going to vary as we think about team members. Okay, so ahead of time when we were talking about this, we talked about, okay, as we're going to grow this and spread it, there's really 4 critical areas that we need to think about: problems, ethics, governance, and scale. And I think, Paul, your comment about like, forget the hype, are we doing the right thing, is really about that first problem. Like, is there a market problem and a business problem that using AI can address? And so I would love for us to start in that section and talk a little bit about, AI problems and what we should look for. And I think Dan also has a great tool that he's going to share as well.
Yeah. So let me just like maybe kick it off, and then I want to
Please.
definitely get Dan and Amy in here. So one of the things we talked about in the setup for this, like prep for this webinar, was are there AI problems or problems that AI is uniquely positioned to help us solve? And one of the internal, just to give you a peek behind the curtain, one of the discussions that we had internally is, I don't necessarily know that there are AI problems any more than there are Excel problems, Jira problems, or PowerPoint problems. There are market problems, and then there are a variety of tools that we can apply against solving those problems. And so the number one crystal clear thing that a product team needs to think about first before jumping to the answer is, what's the question? What is the problem that is urgent, pervasive, and people are willing to pay for, that we could then apply a variety of tools, AI being one, to go solve. But the fundamentals are still going to apply. And that's why somebody put a note into the chat earlier about, is there a parallel framework for the usage of AI next to the pragmatic framework? Our stance is that the pragmatic framework is that. It's just that AI is a tool that is like a layer that you apply on top of the pragmatic framework's fundamentals that go across everything. But the fundamental of, you still have to be focused on your market and your market's problems, applies regardless of what technology you use to apply against that.
Yep. I couldn't agree more. And Brady just said this in the chat too. It's interesting how quick companies just are jumping to roll out an AI-based tech feature or whatever it is. Every day in class, I mean, I don't know, I can't speak for you, Paul, or you, Dan, but I'm constantly hearing people talk about there's so much pressure, and our senior executive created an AI task force, but we don't even know what we're supposed to be doing. And there's pressure and urgency, and but we don't really know what to do with this and what problems it should solve. And it all has to go back to that.
Yep. And let's look at a tool that we're going to share with you when we follow up this. We'll send this out via email, but this is a practical AI decision guide that you're going to get. And this really helps you hone in. Okay, is this a problem that we should be solving? And it helps you look at the market problem from many different aspects. Obviously, have we clearly identified a real urgent customer problem? And is solving this aligned with our product's core purpose? Now, we get into specific areas of vision value, and you can go through and kind of check off in these different areas. As you're assessing this problem, you check these off. You have buyer value. You need to look at it from these different these problems from these different perspectives. Does this feature help achieve strategic outcomes for these decision makers when it comes to scalability, revenue growth, cost reduction? Because these are areas where AI might be a solution. And I said might be. Again, we don't know that for sure. This is the first iteration, the first rev of questions that you would ask. But if it doesn't pass this decision guide, then you don't even need to go any further. So you look through and you go through and you answer all of these questions, and you kind of calculate your score. And in doing that, you're going to find out, all right, where do we fall in here? So once you fill this out, then you're going to have a sense of like, all right, how strong of a potential market problem is this? Is this something that we should go after? And what is the possible alignment with an AI solution? So now you're still going to have to go in and do another assessment of that problem to look at more characteristics, because there are certain things that AI does very well in terms of, it does very quick data analysis. It can do analysis to do, progression analysis, predictive analysis. It can generate things. There's things that AI is extremely good at. If the solution to this problem fits into what AI does well, great. That's another decision that, all right, this AI might be the answer here, but it might not be. But before you do anything else, you need to, as Paul and Amy said, validate that this is something that we should actually go out and solve. And too many people are skipping over this step, as Amy just articulated. So again, you'll be getting this copy of this in your inbox.
Yeah, look for that in your email. That's a really nice tool. So maybe bring it to life, because like we sometimes diss on AI, and like it'd be easy to walk away from this and be like, oh, the Pragmatic team is down on AI. We're actually not. We're super optimistic about it.
Yes.
But I wanted to call out because we're gonna definitely share in this webinar some bad examples. We've all heard bad examples of AI. Two good ones to illustrate what is AI really good at. And Dan mentioned processing large data sets, really good at that. And also things like recognition, pattern recognition,
Mhm.
image processing, things like that. Really good at, doesn't come without pitfalls. But one really cool example that actually was in the news yesterday, might have missed it, was a company called Pano, Pano. They just got like 44 million in funding. This is a company that looks at camera feeds from like all over the wilderness that are on top of these like, towers. And they use AI to process these feeds to look for signs of smoke for early wildfire detection.
Mm.
And they're now covering something like 50 million acres. Because if you catch a wildfire early, you don't get a situation like what you got down in California a couple months ago. So that's one really cool application of
Awesome.
AI. Another one in the B2B space, JP Morgan rolled out a fraud detection platform called Coin a couple years ago. Really, really cool. That analyzed transaction patterns, and they've shown some really, really good results in terms of cutting fraud, reducing false positives, and so on. So these are like examples of where AI can be applied for things that are routinizable, for things that involve large data sets, for things you probably don't want a human doing, either due to human error or just the monotony of it. Like I don't want 500 people looking at camera feeds all day long, right? They're gonna zone out. The AI doesn't zone out, right? So that's a good application of that technology.
Love it. Yeah, we're definitely AI optimists, but we just want we want great products to be the result. But in order to get to that, you need to know how to use these tools and the risks that can come along with it if you know rush too fast, or if you skip over to and just assume that, all right, this is a good problem for us to solve when it really isn't. So I love those examples, Paul.
It is nice to ground ourselves in some good examples because there are definitely some bad ones. Steve has mentioned the Zillow one,
Hello.
which is in the article Brady mentioned too about sort of responsible
Mhm.
AI. And another great segue that came up, right? When we talk about responsible products, part of that is it solving a real problem, but part of it is how is it doing? And this is where we see some of those rushes to market and to get something out really, really cause some disasters. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean by responsible AI, right? From the ethics and the product perspective, and then maybe a few more example of failures because they always do make us smile.
I guess I'll get us kicked off. Whether you use the word governance or responsible AI or whatnot, I'd like to bring a process perspective to the table. I think that it's really important to put a process in place to make sure that stakeholders are educated about AI. There's a level of comfortability with it. We spend the time to do some socialization and some buy-in of it. We are forward thinking and intentional in terms of scalability of the AI and the process that we're putting in place to support it. So that's where I'd start with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the I don't know. I'm kind of allergic to the word governance for a lot of reasons, but it is important to have a process, especially as technology matures, especially as we move into the agentic AI world, where we're granting more autonomy towards
Mhm.
these tools and we're letting them do
Yes.
stuff.
Yes.
We've all heard the term "nail it before you scale it." That's really going to be important as we give these tools more autonomy. I think that there's plenty of sort of really bad examples over the last couple of years of bad AI application with regard to marginalized groups, like facial recognition that, accused people of shoplifting because they had darker colored skin, more pigmentation. And so it made a misread and now they're getting arrested. There's United Healthcare got really busted because they rolled out this thing called Navi Health Predict, which was doing decisions over whether or not to approve or deny a health insurance claim, and later was revealed it had a 90% error rate, and later got overturned. Like these are the kinds of things that like are completely avoidable, if we think about those things beforehand, if we do some testing, some piloting, if we do a little bit of use case development and we think about accessibility, if we think about marginalized groups, if we think about people who edge cases or corner cases, right? Your corner case is my standard case, right? If I'm in one of those groups. And so you have to think about those things before you make it mainstream. And so when we're talking about governance, when we're talking about responsible products, I think responsible AI is probably too narrow. We're talking about responsible products,
Mm,
right?
Yep.
Responsible AI is a part of a responsible product. And when we think about a responsible product is one that follows the golden rule, right? The product should treat you the way you want to be treated, right?
yeah.
It solves a problem that you care about. And so when you think about AI, you don't need heavy process, but you do need to make sure it's not screwing up and it's not, taking bad actions. That's really what we're thinking about here.
Yep.
Yeah. What about, I have something I would love your thoughts on this, Paul and Dan, and even Rebecca. What about giving users choice as part of this governance and responsible AI? Like, should we maybe there's not always the opportunity to give choice, but is that something we should be considering where a user has a choice to engage with that technology or not? What are your thoughts on that?
Mm.
I think I think it helps to be transparent when you're using AI, and you're making it seem like people aren't like I think you should be transparent about your use of AI. It is if something is AI powered.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of trust and honesty, I think, goes a long way with your users. And I think it also can, it can help because, maybe you get a little bit of leniency. Also, you want to kind of be able to have a feedback mechanism where if your AI isn't working properly, if something is back, there is a way to kind of say, hey, this is wrong, please, fix it. So there's a learning mechanism within it. But I mean, you looked at that. It was Cursor, I believe, that they had something where it's a IDE, integrated developer environment, like AI powered, and they did something that really upset a lot of their developers. And it had to do around a policy, and it was AI driven, and they thought it was actually from the company, and it was a bad look on their part because it made it seem like HR was really coming down with this, and it made everyone mad, but it was just an AI error and they weren't transparent about it. So this is why you need to really think through, all right, what is our governance, what is our process, how are we going to handle this, before you end up with, again, your face.
Yeah.
It's really what we're talking about is a risk decision
Yep.
for governance in AI or in building a responsible product. The higher the risk, the more process you should probably have in place. When I think about if any of y'all have ever taken our insight class, one of the things that I teach there in working with data is that there is a balance in building any sort of machine learning model between how many variables what's the size of your model, how big is it, how accurate is it, versus how explainable is it. The more variables you put in it, hopefully it becomes more accurate, but it gets less explainable the bigger it gets, which is fine. Maybe I want a super accurate model, but if you're going to be denying somebody healthcare coverage, you better be able to explain why you did it. If not to that person, then to the government regulator who's going to come calling, or the lawyer who's going to sue you. And so the higher the risk, the more responsible you have to treat your product. Now, on the other hand, if you're building a new algorithm for Instagram that you're going to change tomorrow, then maybe you don't have to worry about that as much, or maybe you do. I don't know. But I think that the risk profile is going to be pretty directly related to the amount of process you're going to need to put in place. Some of that may be foisted upon you externally by regulatory regimes, but if you don't want that, then you're going to have to put it on yourself. It's coming either way.
Yeah. Totally agree, Paul.
And it's interesting that transparency works both ways, like transparent with customers, transparent internally with people, but also your AI needs to be transparent, right? That's the explainability of it, the understandability of it, of how they made those decisions, right? And that's one of the ways I think you also keep your AI stuff in check is it's like, oh, and show me your work, right? Because then they'll be like, oh, I'm sorry, you're right. I made that up. You're like, oh, great, thanks. Show me your work.
There's a really interesting example from France. They were trying to build their own homegrown AI system because they felt like it was dominated by players out in Silicon Valley. So they built this. The government put out a bunch of grants and they built this product called Lucy, which was their own homegrown AI. And the problem is it made a bunch of stuff up, like really bad. Like one of the examples I wrote down, let me see if I can find it, was that it was saying that that the Judean King Herod from like 3000 BC was part of the development of the atomic bomb. It recommended that you eat cow's eggs because they were really healthy.
Delicious.
Okay.
Things like that. And so it's just like, I mean, yes, we can laugh at these hallucinations, but to Steve's point here in the chat, AI is nothing more than tool fed by quadratic computing, and it's looking at multiple databases. That's true. I would call it a probability engine that's predicting the next word that's going to show up based on probabilities. And it's using all that, but that doesn't make it perfect. It just makes it really good.
Yeah.
How much risk are you willing to accept?
Yeah.
It's interesting when we talk about risk too, because we talk about the risk of doing it. There's some comments and some questions about competitive pressure, right? If you are in a market space where your competitor is releasing AI features, products, almost regardless of the depth, right? Because there is a certain amount of newsworthiness they're going to get from it. There feels like a risk then in not doing it. So how as a PM do we manage that sort of like the two different risks that we're feeling when there's competitive pressures?
Oh, that's so hard. We talk about this in a slightly different context in some other courses that we teach, like take pricing, for example. We talk about don't outsource your pricing strategy to your competition. You're assuming they've done their homework when a lot of companies have not. But it's so hard because if they're changing from, to a SaaS model or, subscription-based pricing or whatnot, like you have to react and do something, but we still need to do our homework. We don't want to outsource our AI strategy to our competition. They might not know what they're doing. They might not be solving a real problem. They might be putting their business at risk. So I mean, the rules apply across the board. We want to pay attention to that. We want to make sure we're in a position we can pivot, we can react quickly, but we still need to do our homework.
I mean, it might even be worse than that. I mean, go try to get a startup funded in Silicon Valley right now without AI being part of your pitch,
Yeah, good point.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to happen.
Like it's a reality that we have
And
to, and our boards, even if I'm not, our existing boards are still looking for those kind of things.
right, and your
Yes.
CEO is going to show up tomorrow saying, "Company down the road is doing AI. All my other friends who are CEOs are talking about their AI stuff. Where's my AI story?" So this is where we go back to the framework again and the
Mhm.
focus on market problems to say, what problem are we trying to solve here?
Mm-hmm.
AI is a tool to solve a problem. If you've identified a problem where AI could be applied to solving it, great. But the days are long since past. And when I say long since, I mean about 12 months past, that you can just say, my product is AI and people will buy it.
Yeah.
Or you will get funded for having AI. That those days are over. Like the fundamentals, like physics still apply, people. Gravity is still a thing, right? We need to solve a problem, otherwise it's not gonna matter that people don't care that it's AI.
Yep.
Okay, so one of the things we're talking about, right, is obviously we don't want to do irresponsible. We don't want to add risk. We don't want to do the damage that we see from some of these other companies. So we want to move fast and break things, but not the things that matter, right? We don't want it. We want it to not feel like a roadblock to innovation. So we want to be able to take what's work and scale it. So let's talk a little bit about like pulling that up. You guys mentioned pilots earlier, and I think so often we do a pilot to prove that the product can work. And we forget that an equal part of the pilot is to see where it will fail and
Mm-hmm.
where the risk lies, right? And if we get those kind of things up front, then that helps with scaling. So let's talk a little bit about sort of AI pilots, but then also building into, okay, we've got something that's looking good. We've got some early things. It's solving a problem. How do we scale that? How do we get the advantages that we'll do if we can release it at a wider spot?
So when scaling AI, and before I came to Pragmatic, I did a lot of work with machine learning, and we started to kind of dabble with AI, and I learned a lot from those projects. So when you're working with pilots, oftentimes you're using very clean, organized data, but when you're out in the real world, that's when the data starts to get a lot messier. So you're missing data. You're going to see inconsistencies, and you're not going to be able to cover every single use case. So you have to realize that your data is going to get messier, and you're going to have to be prepared for that, because not everything is going to be as clean as when you're in your pilot. So you have to be careful, be mindful of that as you roll out, scale up. Performance is going to degrade. Is just going to like drop and get worse. And what might work in a small test is, it's not going, as it continues to scale up, performance isn't going to like always scale up at the same time. And oftentimes that performance degradation can happen slowly over time. Like I'll give you a quick example in terms, because you could have underlying prompt drift. Like for example, I built an AI agent, which I trained on my particular voice and how I respond to emails. So I fed it in lots of emails. Went through this very, very specific brand analysis agent, which said, okay, this is exactly how Dan responds to emails. And so the agent would get an email, it would look at the email, break down exactly what was being asked. It would be able to pull information from other files, look at how I would respond to that email and reply, create a draft. And I trained it over time by grading it on 4 different areas from like 1 to 5 until it was perfect. And said, yes, no one's going to be able to tell that I didn't write this email. And Rebecca's been thinking I've actually been emailing her this entire time. So, but over time, the underlying model, which is Claude, is going to change and move and be different. So I have built into the logic, hey, every time you create a draft for me, I want you to rate it the same way I've been rating you on a scale from 1 to 100. So once that goes below 90, you need to alert me because I'm going to retrain you. That's what's going to happen. The performance is going to degrade. So you have to build in, how am I going to maintain that? So these are the types of things as you scale up. Not to mention, your systems can get overwhelmed. It can get incredibly expensive to run AI programs if it becomes very popular. So there's just a lot to think about when these AI pilots, if you're using it in a lab and you're like, this is amazing, be careful when you bring it out to everyone. You want to probably roll it out in a slow manner because there's just so many cautions you have to be careful of.
One of the things I've heard from attendees in our courses doing is that they're positioning new AI features as previews, and giving like to kind of as a way to test and pilot them. So they're featuring it as a preview, get some early adopters. It creates that room for like, hey, it's not perfect, but we'd love for you to get your hands on it, experiment with it all, take some pressure off. And then the idea obviously is that they're iterating over time and they're cleaning up gaps and bugs and whatnot before it goes to general availability. That seems to be something super common, the way that they're positioning it to certain pockets of the market.
And can I give a quick, just to build off of that?
Yeah.
Because if you look here, so I was just describing an agent that I built on Cassidy.ai. But if you look here, these agents and Canvas and all of this, so this is a perfect example of what Amy was talking about. They're agents and bots and everything that you can create here on Zapier is all AI powered. You can create all these different agents. But if you notice here, it's all beta, and they clearly say this is beta. So they're being transparent. They're like, this is AI powered, but hey, it might not work exactly as you expect.
Diminishing returns. Wasn't Gmail in beta for like 12 years?
That's right. I forgot about
Remember
that.
you had to be like invited to be one of the cool kids?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
a lot of startups still do that. So so in the discussion so far, our focus for pilots is focused on feasibility, right? Can we do the thing in AI? So let's go back to I call them the 4 ilities, right?
Yep.
Desirability, feasibility, viability, and what's the last one, Amy?
Usability.
Yeah, usability. The 4 ilities. I remembered 3 of them, so I at least get partial credit. And so I want to focus more on the desirability and viability aspect of it, which is not the technical. It's upstream of the technical. So the challenge I'm going to give everybody, let's say your CEO shows up and says, I want an AI, give me AI, whatever. And so you come up with a great, probably inside out idea to develop an AI thing. If you're following what we teach here at Pragmatic, one of the first things you're doing, if you're doing it right, is to develop your positioning document. So you could very easily do what's called a painted door test, where you put out a landing page, you describe this thing before it even exists, you see if you're getting resonance in the market. And I'm going to challenge everybody, as you pilot the positioning for this product, don't use the word AI anywhere in your positioning. Nobody cares that your product is AI. Literally 0 people care that your product is AI. What they care about is, does it solve a problem that they have? And so if you can describe in your pilot of your positioning the problem that you're solving in a clear way that resonates with people and gets their attention, then, only then, do they start to care that you're solving it via whatever technology, including AI. And so I would encourage people to start there before you go down the, can we build it in whatever technology path? You're going to save yourself a lot of time, a lot of energy, and most importantly, a lot of money.
Excellent point. I think one of the other things when we talk about scaling AI and doing AI is really whether or not it's sort of the buy, build, partner decision, right? And so I'd be interested in everybody's take on thinking about AI and adding AI into your products, or even building it as a tool for your role, right? Do you build it for a tool or role, or do you go and you sort of buy or acquire? So I'd love your thoughts on that.
When it comes to this, we have in our focus class, we have a really nice 4-question kind of guidance where you can work through to kind of give you some guidance on whether you should buy, build, or partner. But AI, this is especially true. Not a lot of companies have expertise in AI. So this is where a lot of product managers are going to have to answer this question. Is this something that we should buy? Is this something we should partner on? Is this something we should build? So you still need to kind of go do the research. I think that there's a lot of questions around ROI, and especially when it's early days and you might be partnering with potential businesses that don't have a proven track record. There's a lot of risk here. And this is why we recommend books like The AI Con, AI Snake Oil, because you have to be aware, just because people are proving something and they'll show you a demo doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to see all of the exact same results. So this is why you have to kind of go out, do training, learn, get a certain level of knowledge yourself to be able to ask the right questions. And you have to, you do want to see a little bit of proof, though, that people have done this and have good referrals and references and things like that. But I'll turn it over to Amy and Paul, because this is a fraud area, because you're going to have people coming in and saying, like, we're going to be able to come in there and in no time, and then they just, the promises begin.
I think that's a risk to a lot of things in general, but yes, for sure. Dan, you got me thinking about the build by partner decision tree. And so I
Yeah.
was just literally real time, like processing, is there anything different if I was evaluating AI? So like the first question is, does the solution to the problem leverage our distinctive competency?
Yep.
Right? Is this in our wheelhouse? Is this part of our company's DNA? Are we known for this? Is this something we're best at? Another question to ask yourself is about cost. Like, can we create a solution? Can we deliver a solution leveraging AI at a low cost? Maybe it's part of our wheelhouse, or maybe we do have internal expertise, but
Mhm.
maybe it's going to be cost prohibitive. And then another question is, do we have the time? What if there is zero time, zero bandwidth, no availability of resource, opportunity costs are too high? That's another consideration, right? So that applies. And then is the required skill set available internally? To your point earlier, do we have the expertise? Those are some, I think that it translates pretty well.
Let's go back to the distinctive competency, because that's, I think, the most important in here.
Yeah.
So let's say that for y'all on today's session that you found a problem. You did everything right? You found a problem that your market cares about, and you've identified it's something that they're willing to pay for. So let's go do it. And now you've gotten to the way we're going to solve that problem is through some sort of AI, whatever. Should we build it or should we get it somewhere else? Pragmatic teaches this concept we call distinctive competencies, which Amy and Dan and I describe as your DNA. What makes you special? What makes you great? What are the muscles that you've created? It's a lot easier to flex muscles you have than those that you don't. Now, I'm guessing that for most of you, the muscle of your company is not building AI. Maybe it is for some of you, but for most of you, it's probably not. Just like if you were to jump in a time machine and go back in time 10 years, the muscle of your company was probably not building cloud infrastructure. And before that, it was probably not building, spreadsheets like Excel. And so you want to focus your precious resourcing on building only those things that make you amazing and great and nobody else can build. And that's probably not AI, as demonstrated by the fact that there are literally hundreds of companies building AI right now. You don't need to reinvent that wheel, get it somewhere else. And focus your precious energy on just those things that make you unreplicatable in the market.
Excellent point.
Yep. And there's already, if you're in certain areas, if you're in sales and marketing and you're like, hey, I want to automate a bunch of different stuff, there are platforms that have already started to take hold. Like Clay is a great platform for sales and marketing teams to say, hey, great, we've got templates. You don't have to build an agent from scratch. You can just plug in and like behind the scenes, we've got the agents doing all of this. So, but yeah, just I agree with Paul. Yeah, like if people are saying like, hey, we need to go and figure out how to write this and build this all ourselves, that's probably the wrong answer.
Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
All right. We do have some good questions that came in, and we've got about 10 minutes left. So I'm going to hit one of these. One of these, Paul, it's you. You mentioned nobody cares if your product is AI. And I think it's a little bit like the competitive one. Joel's talk is about it is an increasingly common request from his customers to explain how his products are implementing AI for their benefit.
Sure.
Any advice on how you might respond when the company is in early experimental phase?
Yes, actually. So we get to talk about my Jedi mind trick. So this doesn't just apply to AI. By the way, this goes this goes for any technology. So I'm sure Dan, Amy, and many of you on this call today have had this situation where a client shows up and says, "Build me this feature. I want it to look like this." Sometimes they even show up with like a picture that they've drawn and they say, "Make it look like that." Or maybe they say, "I want AI. What's your AI? Whatever." And most salespeople would say, "Just a second, I'll get that for you." And they'll quote out like to build a one-off solution. That is the wrong answer. Product management should never, ever, 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 ever accept a feature request directly from a customer, because customers are not trained product designers. They don't know the right way to solve their own problems. In fact, the only thing that they are expert on is their problem set, not the best way to solve it, because when they say how to solve their problem, they're answering the question for themselves only, not the next 1,000 people who have the same problem. So for that reason, we have to overcome the objection of I want this particular technology, AI thing, or whatever. And the way you do it is like this. If a client shows up and says, build me this thing, the job of the product manager or whoever is to dig out the underlying problem first, figure out what problem they're trying to solve. Once you get an understanding of the problem, you hit them with a very particular conversation. You go to them and say, all right, Amy, you want me to build you this thing. What if, hypothetically, I was able to solve the problem that we just agreed you're trying to solve in a different way than this AI thing that you're asking for? And in this hypothetical, what if I was able to deliver that solution that solves your problem twice as fast at 1/2 of the cost? Would you be interested in taking a look at whatever that is? And 99 out of 100 times they come back and they're like, well, twice as fast, half the cost. Obviously, the answer is yes, I would look at that. So then you get to say, okay, well, then you're not telling me to build this AI thing. You're telling me to solve your problem. And they're like, oh, yeah, I guess I am. And now you've changed the conversation.
And I do think sometimes they're asking, what they're really asking is, are you a company that is continually looking and checking on technology, right? They're looking for some to make sure that their vendor isn't being left behind in
Sure.
their thinking, right? But
Sure.
again, if you're to your answer, Paul, it also talks about we're not being left in our behind in our thinking. We're focused on the problems and we're evaluating the right tool for solving those problems. They just want to make sure, like, they haven't picked the
Yeah.
Luddite.
Rebecca, that's a really good point. You need to listen and they need to know that they were heard. And
Mhm.
then sometimes there's a level of education that takes place. Like, yes, I acknowledge AI is all the craze, AI. Let's talk about this. I hear you. Let me make sure I understand the business problem first that we're trying to solve, and then we'll figure out if that's the best solution or not. Right. I completely agree with everything that Paul said. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would love to get each of your answers on this next question. If you had to choose between investing in AI for internal productivity versus customer facing features, what would drive that decision?
And I guess the assumption is we can only do one of those.
Yeah, why does it have to be either?
Look, guys, this is how hypotheticals work.
All right, I'll dive in and take that. So I would focus on internal first, just so that my team, I would feel more confident if they were using AI every single day and had made mistakes internally before they did anything externally. So I would want them to try to get their hands on it, go for those productivity gains internally, get more confident with it, and then use it externally. So, but I could make the argument either way, but if I'm going to have to choose in the hypothetical, I'm going to go internal first.
To piggyback on that, there could also be another benefit in theory if we're leveraging AI appropriately for internal product management process, et cetera, our workflows. It would free us up to have a better, stronger finger on the pulse to make sure that what we're actually building for the market is the right thing and it's solving real problems in the best way possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. You could look at it through cost, as Jim and Joanne were saying in the chat. I think also risk is a key consideration here. You build AI into your product and it screws up and it's exposed to the user. All of a sudden you have reputational and other damage. If the AI screws up for my product marketer and builds a bad persona, then hopefully they're smart enough to look at that and fix it before they do anything with it.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's a lot of different factors that would go into considering it, right? Like it's I can see leaning naturally to using it internally, but I could see weighing some of the other pieces. At times, it makes sense to do both. So, all right. In the last, you've all been on the podcast. You know what I'm going to ask next, right? If you could have people do 2 things differently tomorrow based on what we talked about today, what would it be?
I'll start with one. Start with the problem.
Yeah. Stay true to the problem. Don't get caught up in the AI hype.
Yep.
Nice.
If if there's leaders, I would want leaders to talk to their product teams to really understand where AI can help them, where and to really start to develop that larger plan, to have an AI operations plan, to see where those wins have been, and then where does it make sense to centralize, to help roll out in a very organized fashion, but to get the teams the help that they need. I think too often I'm seeing like they've been left on their own to like, hey, use AI. Give those teams the support that they need so that they can succeed in the way that that the companies expect from them.
Great advice. All right. Thank you for our incredible panelists, Paul, Amy, and Dan, for coming on, sharing your expertise and your real world insights. And thank you all for your engagement, your questions, your chats. It really made for a much more dynamic discussion. Before we wrap up, just like a few next steps. As promised, we're going to send out a recording of today's session within the next few days. You're also going to get access to the Pragmatic AI Decision Guide that Dan walked us through. They'll help you evaluate your AI projects, whether it is the one that's really worth the time and investment. And lastly, if you found today's discussion valuable, I encourage you to explore Pragmatic Institute's other resources and training. There are actually 4 different AI workshops available, and we've got a promo code. We wrestled a promo code out for everyone who attended today. Pragmatic 15, get 15% off when you purchase 2 or more. So bring a buddy, go to 2, go to 4. All right. That does it for today. Don't forget to join us next month when we're going to tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.